Hey there, guys. It's been a bit. This is Devin from Magewright Gaming. Today I want to talk about some prestige classes that are in Pathfinder 1E. There's not really a lot of great ones, and a lot of the time it's better just to stick with base classes, but I got about 7 or so here that you guys might enjoy, and there's a couple other ones out there that are definitely good in certain situations, or solid trade-ins too. But these 7 for sure have their uses that make them a little bit unique or really, really useful that you can't necessarily get anywhere else. So first we're going to talk about the Arcane Trickster. So the Arcane Trickster is pretty solid. This is pretty much one of the best way to make a blaster characters. Because essentially, you get later on in the game, you can basically toss a fireball if you're like invisible or the person can't see you or etc., and you get all your sneak attack damage on it, which is kind of insane. They have a lot of other abilities that kind of make that really useful as well. They can also disable traps from really far away. They're a very effective setup for sure. They're also very easy to qualify for. You need some sneak attack and some caster level. Technically, there is a way to get into those classes at like level 4, but it's a bit janky. Generally speaking, you just take like 3 wizard, grab 1 rogue, take accomplished sneak attacker, and you technically qualify. It's a little iffy though. You want to clear with your DM for sure on that, but it's a pretty cool prestige class that offers a lot of cool utility in the party and big damage, very big damage. But it does require requires a more difficult playstyle for sure, because you don't really want to just sling spells. You want to set yourself up for sneak attacks with your spells. If you can get that though, it's really good. If you're not very keen on doing that, not the greatest one in the world for sure. Alright, next one I want to talk about is Champion of the Enlightened. This is a rather weird one, but I like it a lot. It's kind of like a paladin monk hybrid. It has some pretty useful powers going into it. You need a good chunk of skill ranks though. You need some knowledge, religion, and some linguistic skills. You need Smite, Evil, and Still Mind, which are paladin and monk. So it's not too difficult to get into, but you also have to be lawful good. So you gotta go down that lawful good path, which for some people is a bit of a deal breaker sometimes. But I mean, if you're a paladin already, you were going to do this anyway. But it's got a decent setup, good chunk of skills. You're kind of more like a monk skill list, with a little bit of paladin mixed in. Well, mostly just a spellcraft added in, but still, it makes you get every knowledge, which is kind of cool too. But the big thing that this class does is they have a lot of abilities that let you smite in an AoE kind of to some extent, like with a smite cleave and a smite whirlwind. It's very neat, very cool. They also have some other cool utility skills, like a skill mastery with a bunch of the knowledge skills, and can make knowledge checks untrained. They advance all of the monk abilities still, so like your flurry of blows, stunning fist, AC bonus, etc., all in unarmed, all go up as normal. They're also more about chaos than evil. Which could be good in some campaigns because you don't necessarily always fight an evil person, but chaos is pretty common. Like a chaotic neutral, chaotic evil, it kind of gives you a little more option to play around with for sure. And yeah, it advances a key pool as well. I mean, technically it gains a key pool, but still, it's pretty effective. And the abilities also stat for your smite. As well on paladins. So this basically advances like paladins and monks up pretty well in that regard. It doesn't do anything with lay on hands, I believe, though. I could be wrong on that, but I don't remember seeing anything for that one. I was looking at it a while back. Still very solid. Has a couple cool things too, like the Valiant Stand thing, which gives it like sacred bonuses to attack and AC when it's like alone facing multiple enemies, and Shield the Weak, which basically lets you if somebody fires like a cone of cold off at you or something along those lines, you can essentially just take all of the damage, and then all of your allies get a +4 to reflex save and gain improved evasion, which is pretty huge. Ideally, you don't really want to be taking a full cone, but if you're in a situation where your whole party is going to get hit by it, it's pretty good. Ideally, that doesn't happen, but stuff does happen sometimes, so we definitely want to avoid things like that for sure, though. So yeah, they got some pretty cool things, and they got some like also touch attack stuff and other really cool abilities. But yes, they are very, very, very paladin monk setup. So the code of conduct and etc. is all there. Very cool prestige class though, and they also have great saves and great base attack all the way through. So very solid class to pick. All right, next we're going to talk about one that honestly probably everyone already knows. It's called Dragon Disciple. And generally speaking, most of the time, people just take the first 4 levels. It's a very common dip from martial classes, because if you take 4 levels, you'll get 2 natural armor, 4 strength out of it, a breath weapon, a bite, and a couple other things. And it has, die 12 hit die, and 2 good saves, and 3 out of 4 base attacks. So it's a pretty common one to take, and the qualifications are pretty small. Knowledge 5 Arcana, 5 ranks of that. Draconic Language, and then just the ability to cast level 1 arcane spells without preparation. So some people do Sorcerer, some people do Bard. If you're just a martial character dipping in to get into it, lots of people often do Bard or 1 level of Sorcerer. But it's a pretty common build also for Sorcerers to go into if they want to be like a melee Sorcerer, because Dragon Shaping is pretty effective, but usually still taking the 4 Dragon Disciple is probably the dream. However, there is a pretty good way to take all 10, if that is the road you want to go. It's definitely not as impressive the last 6 levels, but it does have some nifty stuff in it for sure. If you take the last the last 6 levels, you're getting, Blind Sense 60 at the end of the day, more Con, a couple Bloodline feats, which is definitely solid, some Dragon Form spell-like abilities, so you can Dragon Form 1 and 2 a couple times a day, Intelligence, and Wings, and it advances your spellcasting class most of the way through, 7 out of 10 levels, but if you have the feats to spare, you could potentially take Prestigious Spellcaster, which will let you get back one of your level ups essentially into spells. So if you take a Prestige class and that Prestige class doesn't advance your spellcasting, this feat will let you gain 1 level back per use. So in a lot of cases, people who take the Dragon Disciple's Prestige class, that's a pretty common ability to be able to take, especially if you're going hard spellcaster on it. Because usually you don't need a lot of feats, and usually it's people who are doing natural weapons that are going down this line, if you're going spellcaster. And you're going to get like power attack and etc. anyway from your bloodline feats and all of that, so you have room to play around with your feats a little bit. So if you could sink 3 of those in, you can get 10 out of 10 and grab the whole Dragon Disciple line, which is pretty solid. But you could just take 4 and then go back into Sorcerer or whatever if you're in that situation. It's pretty solid. So, it really depends on what you want. But it's a pretty solid Prestige class, at the very least for dipping. Not as much for the full class, but the full class certainly has uses for sure. So that's Dragon Disciple. Okay, so the next one we're going to talk about is Aldridge Knight. It's kind of a weird one. You do lose 1 level of spellcasting advancement in this one, but the feat that I mentioned earlier in Dragon Disciple could let you fix that. But if you're going into Aldridge Knight, you're probably going into a weapon-based build, so you're probably going to need a lot of feats. So you might not necessarily be able to play with that, because I think Prestigious Spellcaster also has a feat requirement of something that goes along with it. I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, but it is quite useful. But Aldridge Knight, basically you should be able to cast 3rd level spells and be proficient with all martial weapons. Most common setup for this is just taking 5 wizard and a fighter, but you could certainly do all sorts of things, like do ranger or something instead, or paladin. Another very common one, but this one is a bit of a late bloomer, is 6 sorcerer and 2 paladin. Gives you the paladin saves while giving you a lot of sorcerer spells and etc. Very strong setup for sure, but takes some time to get going for sure. So the first level, it doesn't advance your spellcasting, but you gain bonus combat feat, so that's pretty good in that aspect. And this has a full base attack, but only Fortitude is a good save, sadly, so that part kinda does suck. However, also the Aldridge Knight levels will add up to your fighter levels for trying to get fighter feats, so you'll be able to get most of like the fighter feats in the game. You'll end on around 11-ish if you only take 1 fighter, but that's still pretty good. Ideally, you'd like to get 12, because there's definitely some really nice level 12 fighter feats, but if you're a wizard, that's worth considering, because you'll still be able to get your 9th levels anyway, even if you did 2 fighter and the Aldridge Knight and etc. But it's something you got to decide on a trade-off, depending on your character class and setup. So then the rest of the build or whatever, you pretty much advance your spells as per normal, but you gain full base attack and die 10 hit dice, which is pretty huge. You also gain 3 combat feats that are going through it, and then at the end of the day, you get spell critical. So at level 10, whenever an Aldridge Knight successfully confirms a critical hit, you may cast a spell as a swift action. This spell must include the target of the attack as one of its targets or in the area effect, and it does not provoke an attack of opportunity. And, still have to roll for Arcane Spell Failure, etc. if you have that. Hopefully you're taking your feats to get around that, but that's pretty much it. So basically, if you get a crit hit at some point during your combo, you get to cast a free spell, which is pretty huge. Spell that isn't going to cast or make you take an attack of opportunity, basically, which is fine. So definitely pretty solid for sure. If you want to do a Gish, this is definitely a good way to do it, or you can just go Magus. And then I have one other one here coming too. And that being the Hal Knight Signifier, which is a very weird class. This one uses medium armor, and you need quite a few requirements for it. You need to be any lawful. And then you need to either have Arcane Armor Training or Warrior Priest, and then you need to have Intimidate 2, Knowledge Planes 5, Spellcraft 5. Able to cast 3rd level spells, and as a special, you need to have killed a devil with hit dice greater than your own. And as we've witnessed by a Hal Knight. But I don't know, some people aren't necessarily so hard on the special features for this stuff, so hopefully it's not too crazy or whatever, or your DM or at least is willing to work with you on getting that for sure. But it is a very neat class for sure. To start with, it gives you the heavy armor proficiency, and it also gives you proficiency with some of the Order's favorite weapons. So this is not a bad way to kind of get into melee or whatever if you're an arcane character trying to get into being a bit of a Gish. But it's very different from Aldridge Knight, and I would say it's a more defensive answer. It gives you a lot of the arcane armor feats and etc. like as you're leveling up, making it easier to deal with the spell failure. There's a lot of advancement where, like, I think at the end of the day, like, there's nothing in the game that reduces spell failure like Hal Knight Signifier. So it's not actually unrealistic at all to be wearing a full plate with this class and be completely fine casting, which is really, really nice, honestly. They also gain quite a few cool little abilities like True Seeing, and they can discern like spellcasting and etc. and have like a bunch of detect variations. It's very solid. They get some Discern Lies, DR5 Chaotic, and becoming immune to poison. And they gain like some telepathy and can see in magical darkness, which means the darkness spell becomes very solid and deeper darkness. So it's an interesting class, and it also it advances your spellcasting class the entire time. It's 3/4 baby. Only a goodwill save though. It's pretty good. It's definitely a class though where you kind of have to think about how you want to play it. I'd say it's on the lower end of being able to just something that you walk into and play right away appropriately. So something to watch out for. But it is a very neat class, and it definitely has uses. I'm sorry, it has a D8 hit die. So not as impressive as the Aldridge Knight, but certainly has some interesting uses for sure. Alright, up next we have the Holy Vindicator. So the Holy Vindicator is definitely more of a paladin intended class, but you could totally get into this with a cleric, and it does work quite well. Life Oracle could probably do it too, I imagine. Your requirements are 5 base attack, a channel energy class feature, knowledge, religion, 5 ranks, and then you need alignment channel or elemental channel, and then ability to cast level 1 divine spells. So paladin's a pretty easy way to get in. If you're cleric or oracle, you're looking around level 7 before you qualify to get into this. But it has some pretty cool abilities. So first off, it's die 10 hit die, full base attack, and it has a good fortitude and will save, which is something that is always nice to have. Nothing really new on proficiency. I mean, you might begin to heavy armor if you didn't have heavy armor on oracle or cleric. If you're a paladin, nothing really new. This class will advance your spellcasting, but only 7 out of 10 spell levels. Prestigious spellcaster is not likely to be a great option in this because you're probably going to be stretched for feats as it is in this setup. Unless maybe you went like Crusader Cleric, you might have a little room to play with that stuff, but still probably iffy. So your channel ability will scale with this class still, so that's actually pretty huge. Your channel doesn't stop scaling at all with this class, it's just your spells do freeze up a little bit. You're able to use your channel to basically turn a shield into having a sacred bonus to your AC, which is pretty cool. However, when it gets struck in combat, the shield wears off, but the bonus will last for 24 hours, basically. So if you get hit in combat, the bonus does go away, though. And you don't actually need to be holding the shield to have the power, which is kind of neat as well. It is very neat. And then there's the Stigmata, which is kind of a big part of this class. So basically, you it gets easier to do, but basically you cause like a wound that like flows with blood or whatever. It starts as a standard, becomes a move, and then eventually at 10 it's a swift, and then activating it causes bleed damage equal to half of your level, well your Vindicator level. It is not curative or halted by magic. While it is bleeding, you gain a sacred bonus, or profane if you're doing evil character, equal to half your class level. So at late game at 10, that's a +5 bonus, which is pretty huge. And you can decide to apply it to attack or weapon damage, AC, caster level, or saving throws, whichever one you want to. If you want to change the bonus, though, you do have to deactivate and reactivate the stigmata, which is a bit rough. While it's also bleeding, you ignore blood drain and bleed damage from other sources, and you also get the ability to stabilize the bleed as a standard action. So it's quite effective. It definitely gives you a very big bonus, but it is dangerous to play with for sure. Any cure wound spells the Vindicator casts on himself are automatically empowered by the Empower feat, basically. So you get a free Empower with all your cure spells. And then later on in the game at 8, they become maximized instead of empowered whenever you cast a cure. They are only when you're used on yourself, though, not on your allies, sadly. You also get some cool stuff like Doom, and they don't increase the DC or whatever. So basically when you critical hit somebody, you can sacrifice a prepared slot to like just boom throw Doom at somebody, and the critical modifier on your weapon can increase the DC, which is kind of neat. And then you get Bloodfire, which is kind of an odd one. You get kind of like a blood runs down your weapons, and you get like a sacred or profane energy that you get as a bonus to basically when you channel smite. It can make them sickened and take bleed damage and some other things like that. It's pretty cool. And yeah, you get channel smite as a free bonus feat at 5, so that's kind of neat as well. And then also you get a versatile channel, which just basically means you can use the 30-foot cone or 120-foot line with your channel, which can be pretty devastating when used against undead for sure. Or just if you want to heal a lot of people, I guess. Then eventually you get Divine Judgment, which basically lets you do death now when you crit instead, which is also pretty good. And then later on you get Blood Rain, and it basically just increases your that channel thing from 5, which is pretty cool. And sickened and bleeding and all that stuff, so it's a pretty cool one. And then there's Divine Retribution, where basically you get to just drop curses on people when you crit them, and they get to make a save, and once again scales with your multiplier on your weapon. It's quite a bit actually too, because if it's a ×3 weapon, it's another 2 to do the DC. If it's a ×4, it's 4. So it's pretty hard to make for sure if you're scaling up appropriately for sure. There's a lot going on with this class, and there's definitely some dangers with it, but it is a very neat prestige class. And it is definitely tough to find prestige classes that are just straight up like very solid. Because as I said, the blaze classes are very good in Pathfinder, so it is hard to want to venture out. This is certainly one I would wholeheartedly recommend if you're willing to deal with a lot of the stigmata issues and have a good class and set up, and make sure you read all your abilities and stuff. I'd really need to take another reread through this as well, because I know there's some weird stuff like with Blood Rain and Bloodfire that I'd have to kind of read to get in my head a little bit better, but still, very, very cool class. I hope people try that out. And then my final prestige class that I have here is the Winter Witch. This is kind of a nutty prestige class. I'm going to be completely honest. So, you only get this like if you're a witch, generally speaking. I mean, you do. You have to have a patron, which is witches, and you have to have the Ice Magic class feature, which means you have to take the Winter Witch archetype. You also have to be able to cast 3 different spells with a cold descriptor. Not a huge deal. Knowledge Arcana 5 ranks and Spellcraft 5 ranks, so it's not hard to get into, but it's very much specified only to witches. However, this prestige class is pretty much just a straight upgrade to witch. It's kind of insane to me, actually. I think you get a couple skills that the witches don't normally have, but not a lot. I can't remember what they have off the top of my head, but I don't think they have bluff. They might have used magical device, but I'm iffy on that. The only real downside with this thing is your first level doesn't progress your spell casting ability. However, witches definitely could potentially fit in getting prestigious spellcaster to fix that issue. So that isn't a deal breaker. So it's pretty cool. Definitely helpful on that front. Can be helpful on that front if you do that. So what does this get? So basically, it's the first 2 levels. It's kind of janky, but you get Hyperboreal Patronage, which basically will give you some extra spells. So you get Wall of Ice, Icy Prison, and Freezing Spear. Definitely not bad, and it's cool to have an attack spell in the Witch's List for sure, because they don't have a lot of those, but that's not really what they're made to do, but it doesn't hurt to have one in the chamber. Winter Witchcraft, which basically just stacks your witch levels with Winter Witch for learning new hexes, so you basically just get to keep advancing your hexes and your familiars, and you pretty much just don't really lose anything. You pretty much just keep advancing your witch, which is insane. And then you start getting all this other stuff. So Freeze and Thaw, basically this one isn't a huge deal, but it lets you do some cool stuff with ice and snow. You can melt snow or turn things into ice, or turn water into ice, and it's not a terrible thing. It's just kind of a neat little class ability, but I'm sure that somebody could probably do something with this that would be kind of funny or interesting. This is a really nice one here, though. Unnatural Cold. So whenever the Winter Witch deals a spell-like ability or supernatural ability that deals cold damage, the targeted creature is treated as having half the cold resistance when determining the damage dealt, which does get better as you get later on in it, though. And then you can basically sculpt ice and snow, which is not a huge deal, but I mean, you could potentially do some cool things with that. It's, once again, kind of a flavor ability, but not bad. Starting at 5th level, you can now add Ice Tomb, Hoarfrost, and Numbing Chill to your major hexes and stuff. Ice Tomb is very solid. And then, that one's pretty solid. And then you get Blizzard Sight, which is definitely pretty useful depending on the campaign that you're in. But it basically just lets you see in natural or magical rain, sleet, hail, fog, snowstorms, blizzards, all that stuff. So all of a sudden, like fog spells and sleet, storm and stuff become very scary when you cast them, because you can drop them and it does not impede you in the slightest. Except for walking in the sleet, that would be a problem. But, seeing through it, not an issue. You get to see everything, and you can wreak havoc with that. So Unearthly Cold, this is the advancement of the other one from before with the cold damage. So basically all your spells and abilities and etc. That deal cold damage become horrendously cold, and half the damage caused by these effects comes from otherworldly power and is not subject to being reduced by resistance or immunity to cold-based attacks. So even if it has cold immunity, you're still half of your damage is going through. That's just how it is. It's quite solid. Ice Glide, basically, you get the ability to glide through ice and snow, like Earth Elementals burrow through the earth. It doesn't leave a tunnel or a hole. You just, boom, you're in the ice and the snow, and you can breathe in it. And the only real issue is if somebody control waters an area you're in or whatever, it'll fling you out or whatever potentially, and you might get stunned. You have to make a save or whatever. But that's basically it, and you can do it for 10 minutes a day. It's a swift action. It's definitely solid if you're in a Reign of Winter campaign. For sure has a lot of utility for this setup. It's a very cool class for that. And then the final ability is Inexorable Cold. It just gives you a +1 to cast a level of cold descriptive spells, into counterspelling, dispelling, or penetrating spell resistance with these spells, and increases the DC to the spells as well by 1. That one's not as huge, but still is helpful for sure. Still really good, honestly. So that is Winter Witch. It kind of just adds on top of Witch, so it's kind of crazy to me. So even if you don't want to take Prestigious Spellcaster, it's worth kind of taking if you have the room for it, though, and you go into Winter Witch, and especially if you're in a wintery campaign, this is incredible. It's a very solid prestige class that it doesn't really make you lose a lot for going into. So would recommend. There's definitely some other cool archetypes out there, like Crimson Assassin's really neat. I don't know if it's a straight trade necessarily up in terms of being really good, but some cool flavor. Feel free to, maybe throw in your comments what your favorite prestige class is, or a prestige class that I should check out or whatever at some point. That'd be fantastic. And that's basically all I got for prestige classes. Thanks for watching, guys, and if you like the content, please throw me a subscription and a like on the video. It just helps the algorithms, and I appreciate it. Have a great day. See you later.